You know, when most of us head into the great outdoors, we usually treat nature like it's kind of a combination of a grocery store and an amusement park.
Oh, totally. We go in, we take what we want, and we leave.
Right. We hike a trail for the thrill of it or take some photos. Maybe we extract some resources, catch a fish, chop some firewood, and then we just pack up our cars and head back to civilization.
Yeah, it's a highly transactional way of looking at the world. We view the environment purely in terms of access or recreation or maybe ownership.
But what if that entire framework is actually missing the point entirely? What if the natural world isn't just a place you visit, but a community you're already a part of with an entirely different set of rules?
Well, answering that forces a complete rewrite of how we're taught to interact with our environment.
Yeah.
Because that shift from seeing nature as a resource to seeing it as a relationship, it changes every subsequent decision we make out there.
And that's exactly what we're looking at today. Welcome to the deep dive, everyone. We are exploring a fascinating educational framework, specifically a core piece of the Alaska Cultural Standards. In our sources, it's referred to as ACS A4.
Right, which sounds very technical, but it's incredibly grounded.
Exactly. For you listening, ACS A4 states a single, seemingly simple mandate. It says, students practice their traditional responsibilities to the surrounding environment.
And, that might just sound like a standard piece of curriculum, but the stacks of pedagogical guides and research we're looking at today show just how profound this really is.
It's massive. We are fundamentally rethinking how we interact with land, water, plants, animals, weather, and the seasons themselves. So let's unpack the philosophical foundation beneath that one sentence. You mentioned it's rooted in traditional ecological knowledge, or tech.
Yeah, tech. So in typical Western frameworks, human beings are positioned as external observers, like we're outside the fish tank, looking in, measuring the water.
Right. With our clipboards.
Exactly, with the clipboards. But in many Alaska Native traditions, there's this core concept of relationality. You are not an observer. You are not some manager sitting above the ecosystem. You're an active reciprocal partner right within it.
I think of it kind of like the difference between being a tourist in a hotel versus being a permanent neighbor in a tight-knit community.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it.
Because when you're a tourist at a hotel, you just use the amenities, right? You
What?
swim in the pool, sleep in the bed, and if you leave your wet towels on the floor, it's not your problem. You check out and someone else cleans it up.
Right.
But when you're a neighbor in a community, you have chores. Like if you dump trash in your own yard, it affects the whole block. You have a vested long-term interest in the well-being of the people and the environment around you because you're bound to them.
And taking that neighborhood concept even further, the sources show this isn't just about human neighbors.
Nate, what do you mean?
Well, so in the Yupik tradition, for instance, animals are not viewed merely as biological machines driven by instinct. They're viewed as conscious beings with agency.
Conscious beings. Wow, that is a massive departure from how, a standard middle school biology textbook talks about wildlife.
Totally.
I mean, a textbook treats a caribou as just a collection of caloric energy and behavioral patterns.
Which means the interactions change completely, right?
Yeah.
In a worldview where animals have agency, a successful hunt isn't just the result of human skill or superior technology or even luck. It's understood as the animal making a conscious choice to offer itself to a respectful hunter.
Right. Because of that dynamic, the relationship requires an intense level of respect and reciprocity.
Exactly. You're obligated to utilize every part of the animal to avoid waste. You're required to share the harvest with community elders. The phrase environmental responsibility here isn't just, a slogan printed on a canvas tote bag.
Yeah, like save the earth.
Right. It's a strict ethical obligation. It's necessary to maintain the balance of the ecosystem so that the animal spirit returns in future seasonal cycles.
But that makes me wonder, how do you actually teach a 12-year-old to negotiate with an ecosystem? If the environment requires this deep reciprocal responsibility, how is that transmitted to a kid who is probably, let's be honest, glued to a smartphone most of the day?
It's a challenge for sure, but the sources emphasize that you cannot learn this from an isolated textbook. You just can't.
So you can't just hand them a worksheet on respecting the caribou and call it a day?
No, absolutely not. It's absorbed through lived intergenerational experience. It involves family and community teachings, and crucially, it involves prolonged periods of quiet observation before active participation is ever allowed.
let's talk about the physical mechanics of this, because I want to be clear to you listening. This isn't just about feeling a vague spiritual connection to the forest. There is hard physical engineering and biological management happening here.
Oh, 100%. Take the traditional Tlingit fish weirs in southeast Alaska that are mentioned in the research. These are fences built across rivers to catch returning salmon.
Right.
Now, a colonial harvest-only mindset might dictate building a trap that blocks the entire river to maximize immediate yield.
Which obviously eventually collapses the future salmon population.
Exactly. But the traditional weir operates on a completely different logic. The Tlingit stone and wood weirs were engineered with highly specific spacing, often around 1-inch gaps between the pickets.
Oh, wow. Wait, 1 inch.
It was an intentional design to allow the smaller, genetically distinct spawning salmon, as well as non-target fish species, to pass right through the trap and continue up the river to spawn. The weir only temporarily detained the larger adults.
That is incredible. That's a sophisticated biological conservation plan built directly into the physical architecture of the tool.
Yeah, it is a literal manifestation of the cultural law to ensure future populations and restore the place after you use it.
I have to play devil's advocate here, though. In Western science, we demand controlled variables, peer review, standardized testing to avoid bias.
Sure.
If this knowledge is passed down through quiet observation and storytelling, how does a curriculum justify it as empirical science alongside standard biology? It sounds, I don't know, a bit passive. Can a kid really learn the intricacies of a watershed just by watching?
I get that. But the friction there really comes from a misunderstanding of what observation means in an indigenous context. It is not passive watching.
Okay, so what is it?
It's a highly formalized, rigorous empirical science. A child isn't just sitting by a river staring
Right.
blankly, right? They are being mentored to recognize complex, survival-critical variables over years.
Give me an example.
So think about an Inupiat youth learning to navigate sea ice. They don't just read a manual, they watch expert hunters. Over time, they learn to read the tonal pitch of the ice when struck with a wooden tool, and they correlate that sound with wind direction, current speed, and microscopic temperature drops.
Wow. It's more akin to a medical residency then. You wouldn't expect to learn open heart surgery by just reading a textbook. You have to shadow the attending physician for years before you even hold a scalpel.
That is the perfect analogy.
Mhm.
And in this ecosystem, the elders are the attending physicians. The framework explicitly values elders as expert researchers who hold longitudinal data spanning millennia.
Which is pretty rare in Western science.
Extremely rare. And frankly, this longitudinal data is often far more robust than a typical Western scientific study. I mean, a university might send a graduate student to study migratory birds for 3 years. That's a tiny snapshot.
Right.
But when an elder tracks the shifting arrival times of those same birds over 80 years of daily observation and then layers that over the oral histories of their grandparents' observations, you are looking at an incredibly rich, reliable data set.
But wait, if this knowledge is so tightly bound to one specific river or one specific type of sea ice, how does a modern school system handle it? Because schools love standardization. Human nature craves a simple, universal checklist. We want to say, this is the indigenous view of nature, and print it in every textbook from Florida to Washington State.
And doing that completely destroys the integrity of the science. The sources strongly caution against pan-indigenization.
Which is a pretty heavy academic term. Let's break that down for the listener.
Yeah, so pan-indigenization is the harmful practice of mashing all indigenous cultures into a single generic stereotype. The research is super clear here. Traditions differ vastly among Alaska's cultures, regions, families, and communities. What is a hard scientific truth for one ecosystem will literally fail in another.
Well, yeah, the biomes of Alaska are incredibly diverse. You can't use the same lesson plan.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Let's look at the geography. You have the Tlingit and Haida peoples managing salmon clans and cedar forest in the temperate rainforests of southeast Alaska. Their ecological knowledge is built around massive river systems and ocean tides.
Right.
You cannot take a Tlingit curriculum about salmon weirs and transplant it to an Athabascan classroom in the boreal forests of the interior, where the focus is on moose behavior, river freeze-ups, and wildfire succession.
You certainly can't give a moose a standardized test meant for a salmon.
Huh, no. And dropping that same curriculum onto the North Slope would be even more disastrous.
Oh, is that?
Well, an Inupiat community navigating the Arctic cryosphere, meaning the frozen water systems like glaciers and sea ice, they're dealing with physical realities that simply don't exist in a rainforest. Their seasonal rounds, their tools, and their vocabulary encode survival data specific to that ice.
Ah, I see.
So if an educator tries to invent a generalized native ceremony or apply a single teaching across the board just to check a diversity box, they aren't being culturally responsive at all. They're just creating a new stereotype that erases the localized brilliance of the actual knowledge.
Man, this sounds like a minefield for a well-meaning teacher. Because this knowledge is so powerful and intimately tied to specific families, there have to be strict ethical boundaries on how outsiders interact with it. How does a teacher avoid accidentally committing cultural extraction?
It's a real concern. But the sources outline a very specific framework called the BioForge Ethical Integration Protocol to help educators navigate this messiness.
Okay, how does it work?
It essentially forges a boundary between biological science education and cultural ethics. It breaks engagement down into three distinct tiers: learning about, participating respectfully, and claiming unauthorized knowledge.
Let's walk through a concrete scenario to see how this works in practice. Say a seventh grade science teacher wants to do a unit on local medicinal plants. How do they engage with the first tier, learning about?
So, learning about is what teachers and students can do independently and safely. The teacher uses public, vetted materials. They might study the traditional names for local weather patterns or track seasonal plant indicators using resources that a local tribe has specifically published for public education.
Got it. So they're reading the menu from outside the restaurant. What about the second tier, participating respectfully?
This goes deeper, but it requires a bridge. This is when students engage in actual community practices, like helping with a local river cleanup or visiting a traditional fish camp.
But they can't just show up, right?
Exactly. The crucial distinction here is that this only happens under the direct invitation and guidance of local knowledge holders. You are a guest in their space, following their rules.
Which brings us to the third tier, the strictly prohibited act claiming unauthorized knowledge. How does a teacher stumble into this?
It usually happens when the desire for a good lesson plan overrides respect for knowledge sovereignty. In Western academia, knowledge is often treated as a commodity, something to be discovered, extracted, published, and owned. Right. But indigenous knowledge belongs to the people and the place. If our hypothetical teacher goes out, maps the location of a family's secret medicinal plant harvest site, writes a curriculum around it, and publishes it online without the free, prior, and informed consent of that family, they have committed cultural extraction.
Let's go back to my neighborhood analogy, or specifically visiting a neighbor's kitchen. You can sit at the table and learn about their culture through the food they serve you.
Yeah.
And if they invite you into the kitchen, you can participate respectfully by helping them chop vegetables. But you absolutely cannot sneak into their kitchen, memorize their grandmother's secret recipe, copyright it, and then publish a cookbook claiming you discovered it.
Yes. And taking that kitchen analogy a step further, imagine mass-producing that recipe, altering the ingredients to make it cheaper, and completely ignoring the grandmother who spent her life perfecting it.
Oh, yeah.
When researchers or educators take indigenous knowledge out of its moral and ecological context just to hit a curriculum metric, they strip away the relationality. It just becomes theft.
So how do we meet state science metrics without stealing the recipe? How does a standard like ACS A4 actually fit into a modern middle school science curriculum? Because kids still have to learn about cellular structure, the water cycle, and they have to pass their next generation science standards.
This is where a concept called two-eyed seeing becomes incredibly useful. It's the understanding that Western science and indigenous knowledge are parallel, complementary systems. One doesn't have to validate the other, they just do different jobs.
How does that play out in the dirt, so to speak?
So Western science provides excellent tools for examining the what and the how. It gives us the vocabulary to measure observable phenomena. We can measure a 2-degree rise in the exact water temperature of a stream, or map the biodiversity of an ecosystem, or calculate the rate of soil erosion.
Right, it gives us the physical mechanism.
But cultural knowledge provides the why. It gives us the historical context spanning thousands of years. It teaches the ethical responsibilities toward that stream. It helps students understand the relationships between those isolated data points and the human community, which ultimately determines what the appropriate action should be.
The sources provide some fantastic examples of what this synthesis looks like in action. It's not just sitting at a desk, it's getting outside. One program highlighted is the Alaska Youth Stewards.
Yeah, that's a great one. You have middle schoolers in places like Sitka and Prince of Wales Island working directly with local tribes. They aren't just learning about the salmon life cycle on a whiteboard. They are physically repairing trails and restoring local streams and salmon spawning habitats that were damaged by historical logging.
They're actively practicing their traditional responsibilities to the environment. And for schools that maybe can't get out and rebuild a stream, there's the practice of nature journaling. The sources talk about students documenting seasonal shifts. They aren't just drawing pretty pictures of leaves, they are tracking phenology.
Phenology, which is the scientific study of timing in natural seasonal events, like when the first buds appear on a tree or when the river ice finally breaks up.
Right, they're linking those physical climate changes to local food security. And they're doing it while maintaining the ethical guidelines we just outlined, showing respect, not overharvesting, and keeping sensitive locations private.
What we are seeing is a curriculum that bridges the gap between learning about the world and taking responsibility for the world. It produces stewards, not just test takers.
That's a beautiful way to put it. We started by looking at our tendency to view the environment as a grocery store where we take what we want, or an amusement park where we play and leave.
Right.
But through the lens of Alaska Cultural Standard A4, we've moved to viewing the living world as a complex web of relationships that demand our active, reciprocal responsibility. We've seen how this is learned through observation and intergenerational teaching, why it must remain deeply tied to specific local ecosystems, and how bridging Western science with indigenous knowledge creates a powerful framework for real-world action.
It really challenges the very foundation of how we position ourselves in nature.
It absolutely does. And to you, listening right now, while these sources focus on Alaskan students, this mindset applies to wherever you are currently standing. Whether you're in a high-rise apartment, a suburban subdivision, or out in the country, you are part of an ecosystem.
Definitely.
But there is a final layer to this that we haven't touched on yet. We've talked about our responsibility to the living world as it exists right now, based on thousands of years of consistent seasonal data. But as climate change rapidly redraws the map, shifting migration routes, melting the cryosphere, and fundamentally altering the timing of the seasons, it begs a massive new question for all of us. How do we practice traditional responsibility to an environment that is transforming into something entirely unrecognizable?